We give our first impressions of the 2020 Honda CR-V Hybrid. Is it okay to put 85 octane fuel in a car that recommends 87? And why does it seem Subarus are so popular with car reviewers and enthusiasts? Next on Talking Cars. Hi everybody, welcome to another episode. I'm Mike Monticello.
I'm Jennifer Stockberger.
And I'm Mike Quincy.
Well, before we get going, I've got to ask the question, why has Grizzly Adams replaced Mike Quincy? Where's my clean-cut Mike Quincy?
You know, it was just one of those things, if not now growing a beard, then when? So I just kind of, got it going, and my kids and my wife haven't run away from me too many times. I don't know. It's just a thing, and we'll keep it for a while. It's definitely gray, which kind of shows my age. But well, hey, it's character, right?
Yeah. For those of you who are listening and not watching, Mike Quincy has a full beard. I actually think it looks great, buddy. And honestly, it's great to have you back on the show. I know this is your first remote podcast since we started doing these, and I think everybody's going to be happy to see you back here. So
thanks for having me back. And actually, it's my second. We did that whole go around once.
Home.
Oh, with the phone recordings, right? That's right. That's true. Anyway, so with that, let's get going. And the first thing we're going to talk about today is this week what we're driving at the test track, and that is the 2020 Honda CR-V Hybrid. And this is a car that has gotten a lot of attention. We've all been driving it, putting miles on it, and getting, kind of first drive impressions of it. But we've gotten a lot of questions from you folks out there, as well as the CR-V is one of the most researched vehicles on consumerreports.org. So we got questions like Bart wrote to us, when will you be testing the Honda CR-V Hybrid? And Wes from Pensacola said, will you be testing the CR-V Hybrid? I love the two mics. We always like that. Jen rolls her eyes again. So the good news is that, yes, we have a 2020 Honda CR-V Hybrid in our test program. Just a little background on the vehicle. The CR-V Hybrid is Honda's first ever hybrid SUV sold in the U.S. It uses the same powertrain as the Accord Hybrid. So it has a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine combined with dual electric motors and uses a continuously variable transmission, or CVT. It has a total system output of 212 horsepower. So it has more power than the regular CR-V, yet it should get far better fuel economy. We haven't finished testing the car yet, so we don't have our own mileage estimates, but the EPA has a rating of 38 miles per gallon combined, and the regular CR-V all-wheel drive. Keep in mind, the hybrid comes with all-wheel drive. The regular CR-V all-wheel drive has an EPA combined rating of 29 mpg. So it's 29 versus 38. So we bought a 2020 Honda CR-V Hybrid EX without any options. After adding in the $1,120 destination charge, our test vehicle came to $31,380. It comes with the Honda Sensing Suite advanced driver assistance features. That includes forward collision warning, automatic emergency braking with pedestrian detection, lane departure warning, lane keeping assistance. Jen is giving the thumbs up for all the safety stuff. It also has adaptive cruise control, which a lot of people love, more as a convenience than a safety feature. But blind spot warning and rear cross traffic warning do cost extra. So, the question is, again, these are first impressions. But when you look at this vehicle so far and you think about how the Ford Escape was improved, many things that were wrong with the Ford Escape was improved with its hybrid version, and same thing with the Toyota RAV4. Quincy, is there the same thing going on here where the CR-V is improved by being hybridized?
First impressions are, I would probably say no. The CR-V hybrid is pretty noisy. It doesn't have that alertness, that kind of light on its feet, jumping off the line, a feeling that you get with the Escape hybrid. I mean, I think after we got done testing both the regular Escape and the Escape hybrid, it was very dramatic. It was very clear. And I think we wrote this in the road test, which was the Escape hybrid is definitely worth it, and it's definitely different. And I'm not so sure that at least our first impressions of the CR-V hybrid are going to come to the same conclusions.
Yeah, Jen, you agree?
Yeah, I think when you hybridize something, the two things that you're looking for are quiet and that electric kind of jump off the line that Quincy mentioned. This car doesn't do either of those. of course, when it's running electric, it's quiet. But when that engine kicks in, it's very, very noticeable. And I think it's so different from the quiet of the electric that it's just like, whoa, it kind of raucous itself to life when the regular engine kicks in. So I don't know that it's going to show as an improvement. Again, the other things with this EX and with the hybrid, you get some control differences. It went to the push button Honda, gear selector. We haven't necessarily been a fan of that. It keeps the big stuff, the roominess that we talked about on the regular CRV. And of course, Mike, 38 miles per gallon, that's pretty impressive. So there's going to be a trade-off for people of, is that worth it? I would absolutely say that they need to drive this car to see if even 8 to 10 miles per gallon is going to be worth it. Couple other things, it gets standard LED headlights. That testing has been done. They are a bit of an improvement over the base halogens. So that's kind of good. Headlights are good if you're someone who has to drive at night. And you mentioned all the safety. That's just awesome. But that's on the CRV in general, not necessarily the hybrid version.
Right. For me, so much of it has to do with it has kind of like this old school CVT. We've gotten so used to CVTs these days that do these artificial shifts. So they try to act more like an automatic, and the original CVTs did what we called rubber banding, where the revs, just when you're accelerating, especially when you're accelerating pretty hard, it lets the engine wind out to 5,000, 6,000 RPM until you're done accelerating. And this one does that. But even like you said, I think both of you said, the initial thrust off the line that we're used to with the hybrid. That's one of the nice things about hybrids. We talk about transmissions and turbo lag all the time. And so you hit the gas pedal and the car doesn't go anywhere immediately, right? And we don't like that. So when you hybridize a car, usually the first thing that happens is electric power off the line. And that's always nice and smooth. It's great. Here, it has that, but it's kind of weak. And so what happens is you press on the throttle. You're like, well, that's kind of weak. So then you press harder. And then the gas engine comes on, but then the gas engine, because now you've pressed it really hard because you're like, where's the acceleration? Now the gas engine, because of the CVT, winds the engine way up, exactly. And it's actually quite a loud engine. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's actually in a sense making it worse than before. So there's just these things that are odd. It just doesn't have the effect the way the Escape did and the RAV4 that cured some of the ills. It made it worse in some ways, and that's surprising. And that's the other thing is that, so now you have this loud engine that's on almost all the time. But, there are some things here that, are actually pretty good. Like, for instance, the brakes, we're used to hybrid brakes having this sort of spongy, very odd feel. And I actually thought these brakes felt pretty close to normal. They're still not quite typical in terms of they're a little spongy, but I think most people aren't going to notice that the brakes are really that much different than a regular car. So that's at least a good thing. And of course, it has, like you said, Jen, the things that we like about the CRV. It has a roomy driving position. It has, good headroom. It has a low and narrow center console, so there's room for the driver's right knee. It has, front cushion tiltability, which I love. It has nicely placed armrests, although the driver's one is a little under padded for my delicate elbows. And I like the seats. The seats work well for me. So the things that I do like. Oh, you don't like the seats, Quince?
No, I found the seats to be really, really stiff.
Okay.
And for the folks out there that know how we prepare a test car to be tested, we put about 2,000 miles on it. So I drove it for a couple days for hours and hours and hours. And that seat is really, really stiff. That was one of the things I didn't like it about it all. I appreciated the adjustments, right. But when it comes down to if you're going to buy one of these things, I'm wondering, would a higher trim line with maybe leather seats be better? Because these seats in the EX were a definite thumbs down for me.
So, but you must have had the same feeling with the regular. They're no different than the regular CRV. So you didn't like the seats in the regular CRV either.
That's correct.
Okay. And Jen, where are you with the seats and the driving position and all that?
Yeah, I was fine. I find, a very upright driving position, so I was quite happy. But I didn't, to Mike's point, spend as much time in it as he did. The other thing I found interesting is in the past, if you go back, Honda was never really good for noise. They had a lot of road noise for a number of years. It's like it was just not a priority for them. And when we got the initial CRV, the regular CRV, we were like, oh, they kind of addressed some of this road noise. This engine noise in the hybrid kind of brings back some noise, not the road noise. So again, I think it'll be an interesting comparison for people who aren't seeing a bunch of different cars every day like we are, to see if that is bothersome for them.
Now, Quince, I know Jen already touched on this a little bit, but let's say that it ends up being an 8 to 10 mile per gallon improvement over the regular CRV. Are the trade-offs that you have to make with this car in terms of the drivability and the noise, are they worth it in your opinion? First impressions?
I would say no. Because, and again, the seats are a real personal thing. So I would say everyone watching or listening to this podcast, definitely try it before you buy it. For me, the seats were kind of a deal breaker. I really liked the access, the visibility. I like the fact that it's likely going to get better fuel economy than the regular CRV. But when it comes down to it, so our tested EX model is about $31,000. So I'm thinking, what would I buy for $31,000? Because I always do stuff like that.
Yeah,
and
you do.
I would go. Yeah, I would rather have a Subaru Outback, the premium model, which is it's like one step above the bottom line, and I have enough money left over to get blind spot warning. I would rather have the Outback and get a quieter ride, a smoother ride, better seats, and I give up some of the miles per gallon. So that would be my trade. You got to be able to make a trade-off whatever vehicle you choose.
Right.
So that would be my trade-off. But I get the appeal of I like CRVs and I want one that gets better fuel economy. So I do understand the appeal of this vehicle.
Yeah, and I just would add, keep in mind, people should know that hybrids typically where they excel for fuel economy is more in the stop and go, not necessarily highway miles. So will be interesting to see in our tests. We've seen it before that the hybrid gains are in the city fuel economy, not necessarily the highway. So keep that in mind if you're thinking this is a long commuter car for, if you have long highway travel, that might not be the right trade-off. It might be more in the stop and go type of driving.
Well, good points all. Stay tuned here to the podcast as well as consumerreports.org. We will have full information when our road test results are fully done, when it's gone through our whole program. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see how it ends up and how it ends up within the class. All right, well, with that, let's move on to audience questions. Don't forget, send those questions, comments, 30-second video clips to TalkingCars@iCloud.com. So today, the first question comes to us from Los Angeles, California. The question is, I want to know why it seems that Subarus are so popular with car reviewers and enthusiasts. To me, they look bland and unattractive, not the most comfortable cars I've driven, and I'm not entirely a fan of how they've implemented in-car technology. They also have pretty average reliability ratings, yet they seem popular on car forums and media. Jen, let's start with you. So why are Subarus so popular with the media and with, Subaru loyalists?
Yeah, so I think you've hit on one thing, loyalists. So just let me begin. I don't know if you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about when we did the questions from home. If you looked in my driveway at that point, there were 3 Subarus in the driveway. My daughter's Impreza hatch, the Subaru Outback, 2020 Outback that I had home, and my parents' 2014 Forester. My parents are on their 7th Subaru Forester, I believe. And they're in their 80s. So that's what I'm going to start with is they are pretty high scoring, high performing cars. Subarus many, many years have been in our top picks, which is a balance of performance and reliability. To the point of the question, they're not always stellar for reliability, but the combination of their reliability and their performance, they're a little bit more peppy. They have great visibility. All of that has made them a car that pretty much suits everyone. It suits my 80-year-old parents. It suits my teenage, now 20-year-old daughter. And that partially is what made Subarus as popular as they are. I will also add, if you go back a number of years, Subaru, because of their all-wheel drive option, for people that felt they needed all-wheel drive, snow belt areas, that was an option to a much bigger SUV at the time. There were not as many all-wheel drive sedans, all-wheel drive wagons like the Outback. So people bought them. There wasn't, today you can get a Prius all-wheel drive. You can get an Altima all-wheel drive. They're all out there. That wasn't always the case. So people bought them. They could afford them over a much larger SUV. And that also meant that they developed the loyalty. Once they were in them and they were reliable enough over time, they kept them. They liked them. And now you have people like my parents who are on their 7th, 8th, etc. Subaru. So I think the combination of the all-wheel drive and being good enough, again, there's some years in there, they have head gasket issues, etc., but it was good enough to make them venerable. I almost used the word venerable for people over many years. So I don't know if you guys have similar thoughts.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right about the all-wheel drive part. I think that really helped the brand, especially in the Northeast and the Northwest, where people are driving in snow a lot and they just want that, the comfort of knowing they have that forward traction, right? I do want to just correct the reliability thing a little bit, though, because if you look at our new car predictions on the current Subaru models, 5 models are above average reliability, 2 models have average reliability, and 1, the WRX, has worse than average. So the reliability is pretty good. I would put pretty good faith in that.
Yeah, I think I was referring to the older years. They weren't always great in older years. And you touched on something, Mike, that I think is huge. Subarus are one of those vehicles that convey an image. When you think of a Subaru driver, you're typically thinking someone who's active, who's outdoorsy. They advertise to that. The people that buy them often have that type of lifestyle. So I think of other vehicles. I was saying, maybe you guys, other vehicles that convey something about the person. I think Subarus do that. Yeah.
Quince, what do you think?
Well, I don't have a lot more to add than what Jen said. I can say that in my own family, we've had a 1999 Legacy GT wagon, as well as one of the last 6-cylinder Outback wagons, which became my oldest son's car that he drove for a while. So, I have an affinity for them. I'm glad you guys kind of had the reliability debate, because I know that I've received questions about Subarus like, why do you guys say they're so great with all these head gasket issues? And I've answered those questions with, yes, I've heard about this. Some of the older models definitely had this. The newer ones, we don't see it as much. I'm always going to speak from our data, but I felt like there were some people that felt that we were giving Subaru too much of a free pass. And it's a thing that I'm sure the three of us are always faced with all the time. It's like, well, you guys are biased and you don't know what you're talking about, blah, 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 because my neighbor had a Subaru and it broke after 20,000 miles or whatever. So it's all by the data. But I like that Subaru has an identity. They know exactly who they are. They know their audience they're going for. Listen, it kicked Toyota into gear because they're finally adding all-wheel drive to their Camry. Why are they doing that? Well, we've got the Subaru Legacy, which was one of those great sedans that flies under the radar that nobody thinks about, but is a really, really great car.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
And I agree with you. We had a Forester before Amy's Impreza that was pretty problematic. So I think in general, Subaru as a brand is quite reliable, but there are those that are troublesome.
Yep, there have been those times. I'm just going to add one last thing. My family has always been a Volvo family. Really, it started in the 60s when my parents bought their first Volvos, and it was because of the safety aspect. That's why they bought Volvos. But over the years, they've stayed with them, and they've thought about Subarus, but kind of as the viewer here mentioned, not that comfortable seats. My family, they've sat in some Subarus like, the Volvo seats are just much more comfortable. So that's what my dad finally broke down, and he got rid of his Volvo V70 wagon, and he bought a brand new Subaru Outback. So maybe they're coming around finally. Anyway, let's move on to the next question. This one comes from Kurt from Denver. Kurt says, I always buy my gas at Costco for the fact that it is the cheapest and top tier. I've noticed that Costco's gas isn't 87 octane, but rather 85. My 2019 Tiguan requires 87. So that's a Volkswagen Tiguan. Requires 87, as I'm sure most other vehicles also do. Will putting 85 in my vehicle damage it or void the warranty? And I talked to, as I usually do, I talked to Big John Ibbotson, CR's chief mechanic, and he said running below the manufacturer's recommended octane fuel will hurt performance and can lead to long-term problems down the road. And so I pushed him further about the warranty issue, and he said, look, it can void the warranty if the dealer relates any damage that is done to the car to being caused by the use of lower octane fuel. So the bottom line is, you got to put in that 87 if you really want to be, that's what the car should use. That's what the manufacturer recommends. You never want to go below the octane that the manufacturer recommends. You can go above. There's usually not much point in it. You're just kind of wasting your money. But definitely don't go below. So Kurt's going to have to look for some higher octane fuel.
I think it's interesting that Kurt even noticed, because I don't think it's something people look at. They see regular, they put regular. They assume it's of an octane level that's sufficient. So right. I'm surprised to even notice. That's great.
Yeah, I haven't seen 85 even.
No. I was just going to say when super producer Dave Abrams showed us this question, it was like an 85 octane. I was like, well, it's like kind of a number that you don't normally see, and I think this whole octane, high test, regular, whatever debate is kind of funny because there are people that aspire to something, driving something like a BMW, which requires premium. Like, oh, I don't want to put in premium. It's like, well, a couple, extra bucks a month for premium is a lot less money than to cost to replace an engine. Yeah. So,
yeah, Quincy, I started cracking up as soon as you said high test. We're old when we heard that. No, because I remember my dad when I was a kid, we'd go to the full serve gas station and said, fill it up with high test, please. And you just made me crack up.
Well,
anyway,
I look old, so I might as well sound old.
Anyway, let's move on to the next question. Steve says, my question is regarding the new Toyota Venza. Consumer Reports advises against buying a first-year model car, but since this is the same car sold in Japan as the Harrier, would it still be considered a first-year model? All right, Mike Quincy, is it as simple as you just bring the car over from Japan and you're good to go, or is there more going on here with a U.S. model?
It is definitely not simple. I mean, we've got a conversion to left-hand drive for the U.S. model. We've got different DOT specifications. We've got different emission standards. So it is not a simple, build it and sell it in Japan and just ship it right over to the United States. It's definitely more complicated than that. Consumer Reports has published stories about the perils that buyers might face if they get a first year redesigned car. Now, Toyota is probably the safest bet among the manufacturers. Yeah. Recent Toyota redesigns have shown at least average or better reliability in their first year, which is really promising. But many cars and many manufacturers in their first 1, 2, or even 3 years are going to have bugs. They're going to have hiccups. Manufacturers send out updates and recalls and revisions. So it is a bit of a risk whenever you buy a first year car. But like I said, with Toyota, that would be one risk I'd probably take.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. Carl from Maine says, we are starting to plan a cross-country trip. I love a good road trip. And was wondering, should we rent a larger car or a small camper? The issue is my wife's backside gets sore after a few hundred miles. Our trip would be from Maine to Seattle, then back to Maine. We'll be taking about 30 days to do so. Should we consider a good seat cushion? We have had several Toyota Avalons over the years, and they were nice, but even those seats got uncomfortable for her with time. I just want to do my best to make this trip as pleasant and comfortable as possible. Well, that's nice of Carl. So, Jen, let's start with you. First of all, like I said, I love road trips. I know both of you do as well. So let's get into the whole road trip thing a little bit. But first, let's address Carl's questions. Jen, should they rent a larger car or should they rent a small camper? And should they get a seat cushion?
Okay, so first of all, that's a long trip, Carl. So I'm glad you're taking the time. That's a lot of driving. Seats are very, very personal. Look at how many times they've come up in this episode alone, be it the Subaru or the CRV, Mike.
Yeah, look at how I just, said I love the like the CRV seats, and Quince doesn't like them at all.
Right. And your family. They were a Volvo family partially because of the comfortable seats. Volvo has good seats. But they're very personal. How many times have we sat in a ratings meeting, which is a meeting we do internally to kind of hash out the good and bad of each vehicle, and been like, I hate them, I love them. It has to do with your shoulder width, the cushion length. Mike, you just mentioned the cushion tilt, all of that, and where you need support. So with that said, rather than pick by just the seat, particularly when you're making long distance travel, is the adjustability. Pick a car, whether you rent it, whether you get a camper. Obviously, we're not evaluating camper seats. Make sure that passenger seat, whether yourself or your wife is in it, has power adjustability. That alone can be the difference between taking a pressure point away, taking, if your legs get numb because they're not hitting just right under your thighs. All of that, if you can adjust that in real time while you're driving, to me, may be even more important than just the seat itself. Obviously, you want a seat that's bolstered and not firm, so it gives you some cushioning, but I think it's more about adjustability than it is about necessarily the seat itself. So that's the features I would look for. And certainly, I don't know if Carl was thinking about with a camper getting up and walking around. I certainly wouldn't want you to do that, Carl, while you're moving. I know campers allow that.
Especially not while you're driving.
Right, and that's my point. I wouldn't want to
No,
see
while
that.
he's driving, he shouldn't get up and walk around.
And
isn't that cruise control? Doesn't it just take care of that?
No. Maybe someday we'll be able to do that.
Jen, what about a seat cushion or lumbar, kind of a portable lumbar thing you can put in there?
Right, and so we've looked into this before. The risk there, and again, look at your owner's manual. Seats have a lot more than just providing seating. Nowadays, you think about it, there's pressure sensors in there that that dictate whether the airbags go on or not. Some of them have side airbag and bolsters sensors like Honda's. If you are coming between the seat cushion and yourself with a lumbar pillow or a seat cushion pillow, you may interfere with some of those systems. So we have actually not recommended those because of that risk in the past. So certainly if it's necessary for a back issue, but take caution and read an owner's manual related to those seat cushions. Some manufacturers are saying not a good idea.
Okay. Great. And Quince, what about, like I said, I know you've taken a lot of road trips. I know your wife, Michelle, loves going on them with you. What are some of your best road trip tips for people?
Well, I got to say this, Maine to Seattle road trip and back is so awesome. I am massively jealous. It'll certainly test your relationship. But no, that being said, listen, I think one of the keys of surviving a road trip is you want to take frequent breaks.
Yes.
You want to make sure that you're hydrating. You have plenty of snacks that you can munch on. I mean, one of the things that you have to worry about being on the road for hours and hours is you're just going to kind of get fatigued. I find one of the best ways for the driver to stay awake and to stay focused, honestly, is to have really lively conversations with your passengers. That gets people totally engaged and it keeps everybody going. Another thing that my wife and I have always loved to do is you download podcasts, you download audiobooks, stuff like that, I think is really important. And one of the things that I think also fatigues people is when you're on the interstate, it can be very monotonous. It's just kind of the same thing, and it's not very exciting. And we've touched on how kind of old and old-fashioned I am. I actually really like a big atlas, a road atlas that has big paper pages. Yep. And the reason I like this is that unlike all the digital maps that we have either in the car or on your phone, you just get a tiny perspective of where you're going and what you're doing. Now, what the road atlas does is when you get off the interstate, it has these roads that have these little dotted lines on it, which means it's a scenic route. So again, you're going on the road for a long time. Get off the highways. Take a longer time. I mean, you get 30 days to do this drive. I mean, go off on some of these scenic routes. Find the drives. You're going through these states that get you off the highway just to mix things up a little bit. I think that's that's one of the ways. That's one of several things to do. But like I said, I am just so jealous that you're taking this trip.
Yeah, no, I that's it. The taking a break and stuff is a really good point. Getting out and stretching.
Radio games. Yeah, I once drove. I drove across the country with my brother once. When I was on my way out to California, and we, stopped to see some relatives a couple times along the way, but we could also switch drivers, and it made the trip really enjoyable. I also drove back and forth across the country once in a Subaru WRX, and I was trying to go as quick as I could to get home for Christmas, and I did it in like 3.25 days, and that was just painful, and so I would not recommend that at all, because the interstates, like you said, Quince, they just get monotonous after a while, and you really have to worry about the fatigue. If you start to feel like you're the least bit tired, you really got to stop and at least close your eyes in a rest area for a little while, because it's really dangerous. And so I wouldn't do what I did as a younger guy ever again. It just wasn't fun. That's not the way to see the country, in my opinion. So
yeah, when I started doing automotive journalism, I had a girlfriend in Connecticut and a job in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I would do that Connecticut to Michigan drive, like 10.5, 11 hours, something like that, when I was younger.
Right.
And I wouldn't want to do it. I wouldn't want to do that stretch of a nonstop, hammer job to get you from point A to point B. The beauty of a road trip, certainly, hopefully, as we get older, is that we can take more time and we're not in a rush.
Yep. And hopefully Carl and his wife are going to be able to do that. We wish you a great trip. Hopefully you can find some nice, comfortable seats for both of you. That's going to wrap up this episode. If you want to learn more about the cars and the topics we talked about, you can click on the links in the show notes. Don't forget to send those questions, comments, 30-second video clips to TalkingCars@icloud.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next week.